Hello friends, welcome back to another episode of Generation Films. My name is Alan. If you're going to be a professional spacer, you're going to need to learn some very basic skills, like how to not be awkward in zero-G, or understanding how to use the right spacer lingo, and of course making your landing into port look effortless and easy. You get those things right and most spacers won't even look twice at you, you'll fit right in. But if you want the fear and respect of your colleagues, you're going to have to master the art of boarding an enemy ship and claiming it for your own. It's a really useful skill and you can basically call it whatever you want. Pirating, privateering, aggressive, tactical, reconnaissance, and rescue. That's when you pretend to respond to a medical emergency aboard a ship even though there is none, and instead of using one of the docking hatches to board, you breach the main bridge with energy weapons. The key to pulling off that kind of maneuver is keeping your voice calm and confident, full of authority and full of truth. You want to convince the ship that you are boarding that you're actively helping them while you're tearing away at their deflector shields and outer hull. It sends mixed messages and it's really great at creating confusion. But that's my favorite way of boarding an enemy ship. Today I want to look at 9 of the best ship boarding procedures in all of science fiction. Let's start with a classic, straightforward shipboarding, the routine traffic stop of the ship known as the Tantive IV. The Tantive IV was a CR-90 blockade runner-style ship, built by Carillion Engineering Corporation. These type of diplomatic corvettes were oftentimes modified for combat by the outlaw group known as the Alliance to restore the Republic. The Imperial-class Star Destroyer Devastator had tracked the Tantive IV from the Battle of Scarif. Although this specific CR-90 corvette had not taken part in the actual battle, it was spotted leaving the rebel flagship Profundity. The Tantive IV apparently had been so badly damaged before the battle it had to sit out the battle inside of the Profundity where it was getting repaired apparently. When it escaped from Scarif, its hyperdrive was hardly functional and gave out before they even reached their destination on Tatooine. The Devastator had managed to track the CR-90 corvette's hyperspace wave. Thanks to its damaged hyperdrive, it was spewing out radiation all over the place. Normally, a CR-90 corvette can outpace an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, but in this case, when the rebels reverted to real space, they found the Devastator waiting right above Tatooine for them. A few shots from the turbolaser took out what remaining engine power they had, and then the Imperial-class Star Destroyer used the tractor beam to reel the ship in. Textbook move. So far everything is going very smooth. The rebels are now surrounded by a ship with tens of thousands of soldiers on board. The CR-90 does have a small diplomatic guard, but they don't really stand much of a chance against a legion of stormtroopers. As soon as the ship is secured in the hold, the stormtroopers begin the breaching process. They're so confident of their success that they only use one entry point. The breaching device seems to emit quite a lot of sparks, so the rebels on board at least have a visual warning before they actually make it through. The rebels don't have much time to prepare defenses though and take cover wherever they can. But this is going to be a rough fight because the only thing more dangerous than going through a doorway is a narrow hallway with a lot of people in it and no cover. Although the rebels try their best to hold off the stormtroopers, they quickly are overrun. The stormtroopers are heavily armored and literally shock troopers designed for dangerous assaults against heavily defended positions. They're also specially trained to board enemy ships, and they're also trained to absorb heavy casualties and continue with their mission no matter what. And that's especially important when you have a dozen troopers trying to get through the murder hole as quickly as possible. You kinda had to be ruthless. Check your wounded when the battle is over, and make sure your Sith Lord Superior doesn't see you shedding any tears. You can't really talk about shipboarding operations without talking about pirates, space pirates. And the greatest space pirate of them all is probably Captain Harlock of the cursed Arcadia. He accidentally destroyed Earth with a dark matter weapon. It's Japanese anime, it's pretty much par for the course. The Arcadia looks like something that belongs in Warhammer 40k. Although it's a highly advanced warship, it actually is more reminiscent of an ancient battleship covered in blackened iron. The Arcadia is one of the most powerful ships in the galaxy, but they are outgunned by Captain Harlock's main enemy, the dreaded Gaia-sanctioned faction and their massive fleet. During one mission, the Arcadia attempted to board the Gaia-sanctioned flagship, the Oceanus, and it's an epic scene reminiscent of the naval battles during the Napoleonic Wars. The Arcadia first plows right through the Oceanus' fighter coverage. The whole of the Arcadia is completely covered in point defense Gatling guns. Then, using its main energy weapons, the Arcadia disables the Oceanus' engines. Shortly after, Captain Harlock rams right into the Oceanus, locking the two ships together. The Gaia-sanctioned Marines waiting at the airlocks are greeted by heavily armed steampunk armor-wearing, axe-wielding pirates from the Arcadia. Absolutely epic. Our next example will be taking place on land, not in the sea or in space. You see, after a cataclysmic event known as the 60-minute war occurs, most of humanity is destroyed and the survivors embrace what's known as Municipal Darwinism. This is basically the version of our timeline where humans decide to abandon all logic and put all their resources into mobilizing their cities on top of giant city-sized tank treads. And as far as city ships go in the mortal engine world, none are bigger or more predatory than the city of London. Salzgitter was just a small Bavarian mining town that extracted raw resources from the land and sold them to other small settlements. The town was powered by a small C-20 land engine, which allowed it to travel around 120 miles per hour. Unfortunately, that wasn't fast enough to outrun the giant grappling hooks from London, which quickly reeled in the smaller city and consumed all of its infrastructure, people, and goods. It's a very effective strategy and causes minimal casualties for the hunting party. Sometimes the intensity from a shipboarding scene doesn't have to come from enemy fire. Sometimes you're just part of a primitive species that has barely figured out spaceflight, therefore anytime you try to do anything in space, the potential for death is highly likely. Sandra Bullock was on a routine mission on the Space Shuttle Explorer. It was her first time in space. She was a mission specialist, and her job was to perform some hardware updates for the Hubble satellites. Fortunately, while she's up there, the Russians perform an anti-satellite test, and it goes horribly wrong. This has actually happened in real life. The Chinese government and our own government has been guilty of it. In atmosphere, when you shoot something out of the sky, it generally falls to the ground. But in orbit, when you strike a satellite that is already orbiting the Earth at several thousands of miles per hour, the debris field kind of just keeps orbiting, and as it hits other things, it'll continue feeding the debris field, setting off a chain reaction that is unstoppable, and orbits the Earth every hour and a half. It's like a terrifying video game where every 90 minutes someone will come out of nowhere and shoot you with a giant flat gun. In between these waves of massive destruction, Sandra Bullock makes it from the destroyed Hubble satellite to the nearby International Space Station and finds it heavily damaged. The Soyuz landing pod she had hoped to take down to the surface was damaged as well. The parachute had deployed already, which means landing would be impossible. So instead, she decides to take the Soyuz pod to the newly built Tiangong Chinese space station. Unfortunately, she has no way of docking with the Tiangong, and so Bullock must eject herself out of the Soyuz craft and use a fire extinguisher to manually guide herself to the station. Look, I know this is a nonsense way of maneuvering in space, but she does this so much better than that terrible human being Matt Damon, and better yet, she's only risking her own life by doing this. Whereas Matt Damon in space is a danger to us all. Bullock somehow manages to grab right onto the Tiangong space station. If she had overshot, she would have most likely ended up entering the atmosphere, eventually. Once on board, though, she realizes that the Tiangong has been heavily damaged as well and was about to enter the atmosphere, so she had to find another landing craft and take it to the surface. The struggle is definitely very real. Space is quite dangerous. The Expanse always provides a good blend of action and realism in its combat scenes, so today we're going to be looking at one of its shipboarding sequences as well. UN General Secretary Christian Avasarala had a very difficult decision to make. The UN Leonidas-class battleship, the Raskolnikov, was waiting in position to intercept the Belter ship. The UN had two options. They could either decide to fire on the civilian ship with a missile and destroy it, or attempt to disable the Pizzozo's main drive with a railgun and use Marines to breach their Naros and capture everyone on board alive. Although Belters are kind of subhuman as the leader of Earth and therefore the leader of all humanity, the General Secretary decides to take Marcos and Naros alive with minimal casualties, if possible. The Pizzozo is quickly disabled with a few rounds from the railguns, and 3 teams of 4 Marines ride breaching pods to various points on the Belter ship's surface. They quickly enter the ship and are able to pass through it without much resistance, but once they reach the bridge of the ship, they're ambushed by the crew. Several UN Marines go down before the entire ship explodes. The Belters have laid a trap. Good boarding procedure and tactics, but you should never trust terrorists. During the last battle between the Cylons and humanity, the Battlestar Galactica has to make a daring attack against the colony, a massive Cylon structure hidden inside a field of stellar debris. The Galactica has no choice but to jump into the system directly in front of the colony's defense systems. Both sides immediately fire at each other at point blank with every weapon possible. The Galactica manages to hold together long enough to actually ram straight into the colony and breach its outer walls. This allows human strike teams to rappel down from the Galactica into the colony, along with teams deployed on Raptor ships. While inside the tight quarters, the strike teams face opposition from Centurions, which are heavily armed automatons. Meanwhile, the crew of the Galactica must also repel Centurion boarders as well. They must hold the combat information center in the middle of the ship at all costs. The battle is fought to a stalemate until one of the Raptors adrift accidentally launches a nuke right into the colony and knocks it out of orbit straight into a singularity. The Galactica manages to jump away at the last moment. Sometimes an alien artificial entity takes over your planet with an army of Tom Cruise clones. Sometimes that Tom Cruise clone figures out that it's not actually Tom Cruise and that pisses him off. That eventually leads Tom Cruise to promise the alien AI that he will help round up the remaining resistance fighters on Earth. But of course, Tom Cruise is the savior of humanity. Even his clones have a sliver of that quality in them. So instead of delivering the resistance to the alien entity, he brings with him Morgan Freeman with a nuke. Teddy Winkles. There are so many memorable boarding sequences in the Halo franchise. In the first mission in the first game, it opens up with the Covenant forces boarding the Pillar of Autumn as you scramble around looking for your sidearm. Then there's the epic raid on the unyielding Hierophant, the Covenant space station / homeworld. But no shipboarding operation was as epic as Joshua 029's attempt during the Battle of Reach. A lot of human heroes sacrifice themselves during the Covenant invasion of Reach, but when a Spartan sacrifices their life, they usually make a larger explosion. Joshua and the rest of Alpha Red team, made up of Spartans Frederick 104 and Kelly 087, were supposed to target a Covenant cruiser that was busy offloading troops and materials onto the surface of Reach. The only weapon that Alpha Red team had that could destroy a cruiser was a Fury tactical nuke. Unfortunately, Covenant cruisers have energy shields, so they had to go inside the ship for it to be effective. And so what you have are three incredibly fast and strong Spartans facing a large force of Covenant defenders. What happens as a result can only be described as a desperate fourth and long last play with multiple backwards laterals and fumbles that ultimately results in Joshua ascending into the heavens carrying a football nuke. When he reaches the inside of the ship, he pulls a Russell case. Godspeed, Spartan. Godspeed. The transporter in Star Trek is the ultimate boarding tool. It allows one to materialize anywhere. You can materialize on your enemy's bridge and take it over quickly, or materialize near their reactor with a bomb and disappear. You could technically even materialize enemy crew into vacuum, or into a black hole, or into your brig. The possibilities are endless as long as the enemy ship has its shields down. Otherwise, it just doesn't work. When the crew of the Enterprise uncovers a Romulan plot to destroy Earth with a terrifying Thalaron radiation weapon, they rush for Federation space to warn humanity. The Romulan stealth ship, the Scimitar, ambushes the Enterprise while it's en route. The bridge is immediately vented into space and several major systems on the Federation ship are damaged. The Romulans have also sent a boarding team. Picard is in a difficult situation. The phaser banks are depleted with only 4% of their charges left, and they've completely exhausted their supply of photon torpedoes. The Romulan ship, on the other hand, still has a shield level of around 70%. Captain Picard has only one card left to play and ends up ramming the Enterprise right into the Scimitar, causing massive damage to both ships. With the playing fields leveled, literally, Picard decides to beam himself onto the Romulan ship and take out the enemy captain. But after he does that, he realizes that the enemy captain has already activated the Thalaron radiation weapon, and now everyone on their ship is going to basically be vaporized. Picard has no way to make it back because the transporter was damaged when he beamed onto the Romulan ship. Fortunately, Data knows how to fix this problem, propels himself through vacuum in between the two ships so that he can physically deliver his captain an emergency transporter beacon. Unfortunately, he's forgotten one for himself, and so he has to be left behind. Which is why now Picard is old, sad, broken, and all alone. So there you have it, guys. 9 excellent and unique ways to board an enemy ship in space combat. Let me know in the comment section below what you think, which one is your favorite. Also, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification button so you don't miss out on the rest of our awesome content. And as usual, my name is Alan, reminding you that life is a movie, and you are the protagonist.